not all the cosmos was in harmony when Adam and Eve were created. Let us not fail to recall the first disorder in creation by the fallen angels. 1/3 fell with Lucifer, over which God had authority. They wanted to snatch at equality and authority with God. And God, to humble Lucifer, to teach him a crash course in humility, so to speak, allowed an inferior ranked angel to defeat him, namely Michael. Lucifer was a seraph, the highest angel, the highest choir. Michael was an archangel. It's about 4 or 5 ranks below a seraph.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, blessed art thou, Lord.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Everything Catholic again. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time to be here with us. So I hope all of you will be learning a lot from this video. Now there are 5 clips of Father Joseph Iannuzzi in the compilation this time, each clip addressing different subject. And the clips are from hours and hours of listening to Father Iannuzzi before. So let's get to the first out of the 5 here.
We are living in very turbulent times, and it is good. It is a blessing for God to allow us to be born in these end times where evil is at its peak, where Satan is unleashing literally the demons to wage a war against all Christians. Now, why is it a blessing? Because, as St. Paul says, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. I recall the words of the little saint who died at the age of 24, Sainte Thérèse de l'Enfant de Jésus, Saint Therese of the Infant Jesus, de Lisieux, and she said that she longed for the days of Antichrist. She says that in her letters, her memoirs. I wish I was born during the reign of Antichrist, she writes, so I could suffer all the sufferings that the martyrs suffer and give them to God for glory.
Now, in paintings and popular depictions of Adam and Eve in the garden, they're often shown being naked without any clothes on. But there's often one very important detail about them that people often overlook. So I hope this clip will help to bring greater understanding on the whole thing. Please listen to this.
A light that God gave Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, by which their bodies were illuminated, like a light in an alabaster vase. They literally glowed with God's uncreated light, and the animals acknowledged Adam and Eve's supremacy over all Eden, because they saw this uncreated light, and in it acknowledged the source, namely God. So Adam and Eve exuded God, and God, by virtue of this uncreated light that clothed their bodies, whereby they didn't need any physical garments, were able to exercise dominion. They were able to exercise dominion over all creatures by virtue of this light. And this light unified all of Eden. Certainly, the animals were made before Adam and Eden and were in harmony, yes. So was the cosmos. Not all the cosmos was in harmony when Adam and Eve were created. Let us not fail to recall the first disorder in creation by the fallen angels. 1/3 fell with Lucifer, over which God had authority. They wanted to snatch at equality and authority with God. And God, to humble Lucifer, to teach him a crash course in humility, so to speak, allowed an inferior ranked angel to defeat him, namely Michael. Lucifer was a seraph, the highest angel, the highest choir. Michael was an archangel. It's about 4 or 5 ranks below a seraph. In any event, there was a disorder in the cosmos as a result of as a result of the rebellion of the angels, even before Adam and Eve were created. But not in Eden. God preserved this place from that disorder of Lucifer, so that the authority that God once gave to Lucifer over the entire material order, after Lucifer's rebellion, he now gave to Adam and Eve. You see, God allowed Adam and Eve to have the authority Lucifer had. That is, master over the cosmos.
For the following clip, it's one where Father Iannuzzi talks about the vision of Don Bosco, as well as what God the Father told St. Catherine before. And it is a very important reminder for all, especially for us Catholics.
So that in these dark days, in these end times, we have a good anchor upon which to rely, so as not to be set adrift in this tumultuous sea in which the Church is attacked, as St. Don Bosco put it, by the media. Remember that great vision of Don Bosco in the great sea representing the sea of God's creation, in the middle of which were vessels and a big vessel, ship, representing the Catholic Church at the helm of which was the Pope. And as he approached the ports, port this ship, the battle became more intense, and these vessels were using instruments to bring down the ship. They succeeded in killing the Pope, but then another one took his position and ported this vessel, the church. Now, what were the instruments these vessels were using? Don Bosco says, principally, they were the media, newspaper, articles, magazines. Well, that's the condition of the church today. Today we're living in the times Don Bosco foresaw over 100 years ago. And the greatest weapon Satan is using to bring down the church is the media that attacks and exploits and magnifies all the imperfections and weaknesses and sins of the church. Unfortunately, and I say this with a heavy heart, many Catholics are among those that attack the church. Catholics that, in the name of orthodoxy, bash with bad words the Roman Pontiff, the bishops, the anointed that God himself, by his own divine will, ordained. Consider this, for those of you who think that it's not bad to criticize and bring down publicly God's anointed. Consider that Jesus Christ chose Judas Iscariot, knowing that he would betray him. Meditate on that for a few minutes, and then try to come up with a rational answer. What does it tell you? It tells you, number one, that God, knowing that an anointed will betray him, will still respect, that's the key word here, have reverence toward and respect the anointed. And this is something that has fallen out of our modern lexicon. For whatever reason, and this is just a parenthetical topic, since we're on it, it's timely, and this is why I am giving it a little bit of attention only. This is why it is important to revisit this. We, as a Catholic community, I think, by and large, fail to make a critical distinction. And that distinction is separating the person from the act that the person performs, the sinner from the sin, the saint from the meritorious acts. We don't glorify a saint because of their acts. Rather, we glorify God because of the saint's acts. The same thing with the sinner. We do not condemn the sinner because of the sin. God can only do that. But we pray for the sinner on account of their sins. As Catherine of Siena is told by Jesus, we pray with wet tears, imploring God for their conversion. And when it comes to an anointed, Jesus tells Catherine of Siena, as does God the Father, that we should always respect and revere them. And if we don't, these are the words of God the Father to Catherine of Siena, we are speaking against God, not the anointed. Now, I'm not making this up. I'm simply conveying what God revealed to Catherine of Siena. And it's important because God has given to the anointed the keys of knowledge, and he expects that we respect them. Even though I'm a priest, I don't demand this respect or reverence, but I give it to my brother priests. I give it to the Pope. You could look at all of my articles online. I will never be short or shy in reverence toward a minister, ever. But I don't demand it of you, but I do demand it of myself toward other priests.
And I've been meaning to cover this one as well, on how God can be both present in heaven as well as in the bread and wine.
The Council of Trent employed the expression real presence to explain how God can be both present in heaven and in the bread and wine after the consecration of Mass. So when the bread and wine are consecrated at Mass, Jesus is both present in his full glory in heaven, with the Father and the Spirit, and the Blessed Mother and the angels and saints, but at the same time, in the substance of the bread and the wine that is consecrated. In the Eucharist, in the bread that's consecrated, as well as in the wine that's consecrated, Jesus' divine person is present. The divine nature of the three persons is present, but Jesus' divine person alone incarnated himself in matter, in the matter of bread and wine, and in human flesh. The Father and the Spirit, as persons, did not incarnate themselves. Only the second person of the Trinity. Okay. So this means that Jesus' person, divine person, is present in the Eucharist. Remember, in the Eucharist, Jesus replaces the substance of the bread and wine. And he so imbues and endows the accidents of the bread and wine with that very substantial presence of his, that all of the Eucharist and all of the wine is God. In other words, within the Eucharist, within the wine, within the bread, there is present God's body, blood, soul, and divinity in the second person of the Trinity of Jesus Christ. Because the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, replaces the substance of the bread and the substance of the wine while retaining the appearance, the accidents of bread and wine. So we eat bread. The physical property of that which we eat in the Eucharist is bread. The physical property of that which we drink in the Eucharist is wine. So the accidents do not change in their appearance or their accidents, right? That's a philosophical term. Accidents means really the external, and substance is the internal, to make it simple. So while Jesus replaces the substance and retains the existing accidents of bread and wine, he nonetheless endows and imbues all of it, accidents and substance, with his presence. So the whole Eucharist and all of the bread and all of the wine contain all of God. So much so that if you take a small little particle, let's say a centimeter in size of the bread, and one drop of blood from the chalice, that too contains all of God. So God cannot be compartmentalized in his presence. We cannot say that if I receive a quarter of the Eucharist, I don't receive the whole Eucharist. That is false. Because God is fully present in every little molecular atomical presence of that bread and wine.
And the last clip that I'd like to share with you here will be on the Virgin Mary. And for those of you who are still here watching and listen, I hope all of you have learned a lot so far.
Some people say Mary never died. She experienced what the Eastern Fathers refer to as a dormition, right? And that's true. She experienced a dormition, but she did die. If you read the encyclical by Pope Pius XII on Mary's Assumption, he mentions that she died 3 times. Even the mystics refer to Mary's death. So there's no sin, no offense to Mary in saying she died like Jesus died, but we refer to her death as a dormition because she did not, like Jesus, undergo any corruption of the body. She and Jesus were taken immaculately, body and soul, into heaven. The only difference between Jesus and Mary is that Jesus ascended and Mary was assumed. In other words, Jesus rose by his own power. Mary did not. She was assumed by God's power into heaven, body and soul. Hence the distinction between ascension and assumption. So when we refer to Mary as having been assumed body and soul into heaven, and Jesus as having ascended body and soul into heaven, we can refer to it as a death as well as a dormition. Okay?
Well then, that will be all for the video this time. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully all of you have learned so much from this video. And remember, if ever you have any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching and may God bless you.